I really don't need to. So I'm going to talk about some family members, and quite honestly, you probably wish they'd been orphaned and never had any. The first one is actually from a personal perspective. 31st of May 2010, I got a cab outside my in-laws, and I paid the cab driver, and he seemed distracted. He gave me the wrong change. I looked at him, I thought there was a problem. I didn't realise that he had problems with his tax, and that 2 days later he would go on to kill 12 people and injure 11 before killing himself, because this was Derek Bird, the cab driver in Whitehaven. During that time, he drove past my nephew's school and stopped, and he ended up being close to where my father-in-law was, who'd gone on walkabout. For 2 hours, we were desperately trying to find my father-in-law. And this was caused by the paranoia that Derek felt that he's been betrayed by his twin, the first person he killed. He shot him 11 times. Now, that's personal. Now, how does paranoia affect you? Well, you've only got to look at Richard Nixon and his brother. And this paranoia spiralled and became Watergate and beyond. And it was down to his concern that in 1957, Howard Hughes had lent his brother Donald £205,000 to bail out Donald's California restaurant, which actually went bankrupt within the year. And then in 1972, John Meyer, via Howard Hughes, started feeding Donald misinformation that the Democrats that year were bound to win, and there was a desire to prove that the Democratic National Chairman, it was Larry O'Brien, was working for Hughes. And this led to getting people involved like Hunt, to break it, who was renowned for breaking into places, that's what he'd done for years in the past, to become involved, and hence Watergate and beyond. It was later proven to the HSEE that in fact some of the campaign contributions had actually been funneled through to Donald and Edward Nixon. The veteran journalist Nancy Drew said last month, "There's an airy parallel between what Trump is doing and what Nixon did." Ooh. But for our history, surely the worst siblings are Lyndon Johnson and his sister Josepha, because it was alleged in 1984 that Johnson had ordered the killings of her and 16 others. Killing your own sister, well, what's she done? Well, she had helped him in his Box 13 vote rigging way back. And in 1951, she'd been in a thespian group. I say thespian, but lesbian also comes into play here, with Doug Kinzer and Mary Andre Wallace. And Mary Andre Wallace was the wife of Mac Wallace. Now, Mac had separated from his wife at one point and actually did go out with Josepha. And Josepha and Mary were bosom friends, literally. The Vice Squad raided Zyka Park in Austin, where there were sex orgies taking part. And the bisexual Josepha, who'd allegedly worked in a brothel, was involved with these. She was an alcoholic and a drug user, and is alleged that via her next lover Kinzer, both of them, that she tried to get money out of LBJ. And as we all, I'm sure, know, that Mac Wallace borrowed an FBI gun, and stupidly, using his own car, he goes in and shoots Kinzer at the miniature golf course which he had. Now at the trial, 11 of the jurors wanted the death penalty, 1 wanted life. However, as we know, he got off with a suspended sentence and just got free. Now, what we do know is that some of the jurors phoned Doug Kinzer's family to apologise and said that they'd received death threats. So what does that tell us? It tells us that Lyndon B. Johnson had incredible power at the time. he then went on to get Wallace, positions within the government. This is effectively a killer. Now, how did Josepha die? Well, she'd been at a Christmas Eve party at Lyndon B. Johnson's. Wow, that must have been quite a party. What she'd done during that? We all have problems at Christmas, but 11:45 she left at Christmas Eve. By 3:15, who was there at 3:15 to know she was dead? Isn't that suspicious? A doctor who was not present wrote her death certificate and said she'd had a brain hemorrhage. How he would know, and there was no autopsy, despite that being state law. Now, she was embalmed on Christmas Day and buried on Boxing Day. Now, Boxing Day, seldom is this term seemed more appropriate. And I don't think Lady Bird was crying either, because she had been using her own money to help with Lyndon's family members. They were always asking her for money. Now, the 4 words that Lyndon tended to use, and I've heard this from several people, was get rid of him, or get rid of her, in this case. He didn't want to follow up and find out how it was going to be done. I don't know how in this instance, whether she was suffocated, poisoned, I guess we'll never know. But was Mac Wallace involved in 63? Well, Glenn Sample, the researcher, found out that he wasn't at work at that day, and certainly he fitted the description of somebody that was seen near the TSBD. Whether he was on the 6th floor or whether he was at the grassy knoll, we don't know. But you always, I believe, as researchers, need to work out where this source came from. Is it reputable? This is an allegation, after all. It was in a letter when Billy Sol Estes was trying to do a plea bargain. It was via a lawyer called Doug Caddy. Now, let's look into Doug Caddy. He was the lawyer for the Watergate burglars. The reason why was that he had had a friendship with Howard Hunt, because both of them had worked for the Mullen Corporation in the 70s. Now, that's a CIA conduit. So, in 1960, in fact, this same lawyer had started the Young Americans for Freedom Council with Marvin Liebman and William Buckley, and that council had 11 John Birch Society members. So I'm very worried about Douglas Caddy himself. Okay. So the Watergate burglars. Let's look at Hunt. I set myself various thoughts as to friends and family. And quite a point of fact, Hunt sort of fitted in quite a few places. If you've ever read about the Watergate burglars, it is the most incompetent thing you've ever heard. They ought to film it as it actually happened. It was completely farcical, and seemingly people that had worked with Hunt in the past said that he was fairly incompetent with virtually everything he did. He went to jail for 33 months and was going bankrupt. And as I said, I always think that you need to look to see what people do after 63 and who support and who their friends are, and that will give you an idea of perhaps what was happening then. So let's look at the godparents of Hunt's kids. Now, don't forget, he's in jail for 33 months. He's got 4 kids. When he became, he and his wife converted to Catholicism, the godfather was, for all 3 children, was William Buckley. Remember the same William Buckley? Who was the author of the National Review, and I think he did an atrocious job. He was, for many years, a very respected journalist. He was the son of a millionaire, but he did not come to their help and the kids' help. They got kicked out of their house and they had a terrible life. The other child, 9-year-old David, his godfather, I think he did worse, was Manuel Artemi. We all know Manuel. So Manuel came and take him. He went to live in Florida, And Manuel, truly know, was actually working for Trafficante and part of the drug ring by that time, and had very wealthy people that he was selling to. So David Hunt, at a very early age, became a dealer in cocaine and a drug addict himself. So be wary. Now the reason that the poor old David had to go and live with Godfather was that Hunt's wife was killed in the plane crash in December 1972. It was going from Dallas to Chicago. It was a United Airlines flight. There was a problem as they were coming into Chicago with the runway marker lights. They struck the trees. 3 of the flight crew were killed, 40 of the 55 passengers. People have always thought it very suspicious, because, and there's a good reason for this, including Hunt, was that 50 FBI agents suddenly raced to, even the NTSC, when they were looking into that, thought it was very suspicious that so many FBI agents should be available. When I was researching it, I found out that, bear in mind, Hunt is in prison. He had to recognise his wife not from photos, but from her jewellery. Did she actually even die? We know that Dorothy Hunt had also been, as is usually the case with intelligence people, they often marry within the intelligence community. It's not unusual at all. Who do you speak to? She'd been formerly CIA. She was working as a paymaster at the time. She had $2 million worth of money orders, etc., on her because she was acting to pay the families of the Watergate burglars. And do we think that's suspicious? Of course we do. So who else died? Marcia Clark. No, not OJ's Marcia Clark. The CBS reporter. She was supposed to have various things, and she'd interviewed people. It's a bit like Dorothy Kilgallen. She'd interviewed people. She was cremated against her family's orders, and her mortician was murdered shortly after. So, there we go. Now, I'm going to talk about another spouse couple in intelligence. William and C.J. Harvey, that's Clara Grace Harvey. They originally met and they were working for the FBI, and then both Bill and C.G., as she was always called, then moved to the CIA. But my favourite story about them is in January 1951, The Party from Hell, it was called. It was held by Kim Philby in Washington. He'd been here since 1949. And as we know, William Harvey was an alcoholic, and C.G. wasn't far behind. She got increasingly noisy during the day, and she was complaining about the cold English roast beef, thought it was absolutely disgusting. By the time they got to the Scotch, things were truly getting out of hand. There was a mixture of FBI and CIA people, most renowned being Jim and Cicely Angleton. And one of the guys there does admit that they were talking shop, which concerns me. Obviously, they're talking in front of Kim Philby. And so C.G. asked if Guy Burgess would do a sketch of her, because he was renowned for being quite a good artist. And he actually did, and there are places where you can read about how descriptive it was. It was very pornographic. As you can imagine, and Bill Harvey had to be restrained. He was furious. And it's thought that this is one of the reasons that Bill Harvey then turned his attention even more to Kim Philby. And you know, I can remember the tales from reading about British intelligence when Bill Harvey was there arguing, you know, that Philby was definitely an agent, because a few months later Burgess and McLean deflected in the May, but British intelligence just ignored this. And Hoover ignored William Harvey for a long time. Harvey continued to be a man who was incredibly angry with everybody for not listening to him, and most of the time he was right. This is a man that then goes on to recruit the mob into the ZR the assassination plans, and he becomes so friendly with Johnny Roselli that his daughter calls her Roselli Uncle Johnny. And what is the worst thing you would do? Well, obviously he argued very much and was getting more alcoholic, so that Bobby Kennedy thought it would be a great idea to send him to Rome as chief of station. Italy, you send somebody to the head of the mafia, a ridiculous place to go. But although they try to say that he stayed in Rome, in fact there's incidences, when he was in Mexico and continued being involved in plans right up to October 90 and November 63. Now, I have always believed, I might have changed my belief about LBJ over the year, never ever changed my belief that, for me, William Harvey was what I'm going to call him is the logistics commander. I don't think he was the instigator, I don't think he was the mastermind, but he was one of the few people who had, despite his alcoholism, the brains to actually get the people into place at the time. This is something he'd been doing for decades, and boy was he angry, and he had all the right connections. Now I'm going to go on to a cousin, and bearing in mind what's been said today, the most important cousin, and that's Oswald's cousin, Marilyn Moret. And I do apologise, because my surname was Beret, and her surname was Moret, and mine was mispronounced, but I will continue incorrectly with the anglicised version of it. She was born in 1928, and researchers really haven't got very far, and I've only started researching her, and the more I do it, the more I realise just how important she is. There's a lot of people say, oh, Oswald is, great friendly, he's great friend. Well, this is, I think, hogwash. I can find no proof that Oswald and Marilyn were great friends. There's 11 years between them, and so that means when Oswald was 10, she was already 21. When you're a kid, even 2 years makes a difference. Get beyond 2 years. However, the black sheep of my family is my cousin, a serial gigolo who's been married 3 times to elderly women. If they get any older, he's going to have to dig them up. So I do appreciate that, we all have problems. My other cousin, I have another cousin who's 11 years older than me, and although I didn't have much to do with her when I was young, I idolised her. When she got engaged to a librarian, I then spent the next 9 years wanting to be a librarian. I suspect that's the sort of relationship that Oswald had with Marilyn. And there's one line, remember when somebody said he might have Asperger's? Look at her Warren Commission statement. He was perfectly content with being the way he is. And think in the context of that. To me, it said, and I always had a query of it, the way he is, perhaps that's what she was trying to say. And I'll just read her descriptions of him, because this is somebody who truly knew him for a long time. He lived with the family when he was young. He was an adorable little boy by all accounts. He thought he was extremely intelligent. He was more intelligent than his grades indicated. He would read encyclopedias like someone would read a novel. I think that tells us a lot. He was quiet, refined, well-mannered. I have another query of it. Very erect in his walk. I'm not quite sure what she's trying to say there. But the reason I think we should all be suspicious of Marilyn is that this is a woman, 35, who is a single woman and says she's a teacher and goes all around the world. Where does she get the money? Why is she going? It's ridiculous. So New Zealand, Australia, Philippines, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaya, Japan, 61, India, Pakistan, back through Europe, July and August 63, Mexico. So I looked more and found her on passenger manifolds, Bermuda, Florida, this is just 1 year, Bermuda, Florida, Belgium, Amsterdam, New York, etc. Where is she getting the money to do this? It's all incredibly suspicious.
Excuse me,
Now,
Jean, is she Charles Murrett's daughter?
yes,
All right, the bookie.
yes,
All right, okay.
yeah. She's one of the New Orleans kids. So I mistakenly had always thought that she was an English teacher. Anybody know what she did her degree in? It was in, if I can find it was in, I actually did find a lot at Loyola. She did it in medical technology. I looked up in 46 exactly what that was. It was lab science. It's now called lab science. Empirical biological science, organic chemistry and microbiology. And it's for the lab tests, detection, diagnosis, prevention and treatment of disease. And that I looked at the professors who were teaching and what their specialities were, and it was forensics and looking at diseases. The MD professor at MedTech at the time was a James Godet. I don't know how common Godet is, but in 1975, the CIA's William Godet, remember he of the Mexico ticket, told Bernard Fensterwald, the attorney, Marilyn may have worked for the agency in New Orleans. Really? I wonder why. Now, if you look at when Jenna is questioning her and asking her